Dear colleagues, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the UNECE Regional Forum on Sustainable Development side events on making the most out of citizen science data to monitor SDGs, recommendations and good practices for NSOs, organized by UNITAR. My name is Howie Chen, coordinator of the Intersecretariat Working Group on Household Surveys, a group that consists of 11 international agencies and 8 member states, and we work a lot on household survey related topics. I'm also part of the UN Statistics Division. It is great pleasure to be here. Dear colleagues, data produced by citizens have become an important source for informing policies and monitoring, including on the SDGs for scientific knowledge production. These data can also help mobilize action, raise awareness on the world's most pressing social, environmental, and economic challenges, and include citizens in public decision-making. Engagement of citizens in various stages of data production also helps improve transparency, accountability, and effectiveness of public institutions. There are many ways of engaging citizens in data collection and research, which are influenced by social, political, economic, cultural, and geographic factors and scientific disciplines. Today, we'll hear many exciting examples on this. Today's side event consists of 2 parts. During the first part, we'll have 6 presentations covering exciting initiatives and national practices on using citizen science or citizen-generated data for SDGs, including the launch of the policy brief on citizen science data for SDG monitoring. In the second part, our colleague from OHCHR will launch the Crowd4SDG challenge for SDG goals 13 and 16. Without further ado, I would like to invite the first speaker, Elena. Elena is a senior specialist in strategic implementation of the 2030 Agenda Unit from UNITAR. Elena will present the key findings from the policy brief. The floor is yours, Elena.
Thank you very much, Howie. I'm going to share my screen now. So I hope you can all see my presentation. Yes.
Yes.
So it's a great pleasure for me to be presenting today the policy brief that we are about to launch with a number of colleagues with a focus on how we can better leverage citizen science data to track progress on SDGs. This policy brief has been designed with the view of aiming at the needs of national statistical offices and systems in the first place, but also governments more broadly. Before I go into the policy brief, I would like to say that the policy brief had been coordinated by UNITAR as part of its activities under the European Union funded project Crowd4SDGs. And but the work had been done with a number of other partners from the UN and outside, and you can see the logos of these organizations on my PowerPoint page. This involves UN Statistics Division, Convention on Biodiversity, UN Women, World Health Organization, Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data, International Institute for Applied System Analysis, and also colleagues from Citizen Science Center Zurich. Let me start first by discussing what do we mean by citizen science data. The way we defined it in the policy brief, these are data produced by citizens who voluntarily contribute their time, knowledge, skills, or their data to help produce needed evidence, strengthen accountability, or help develop locally rooted solutions. The word voluntarily is key here. It really highlights the importance of active engagement on behalf of citizens as a way of contributing to global public goods, basically dedicating their time and skills to help produce valuable data. So how exactly can citizens contribute to data production? They can help define, for example, locally relevant indicators. You will hear about one example from Crowd4SDG challenges today about indigenous women, and who, if not them, are best positioned to help and say how exactly their well-being situation should be measured. Then citizens can also help collect data and analyze or classify data. There are a lot of citizen science projects that involve these two tasks. They can also help share their personal data on health or lifestyles, and as part of experimental projects, or donate their devices' computing power for modeling or simulations. And perhaps there are other ways which we still haven't scoped within our efforts as organizations, but that might be already out there in how citizens contribute to data production. Then in terms of the institutional setup, very quickly, there is a range of setups with projects run by academia, research institutions, local or international civil society organizations and NGOs, communities, and also there are some emerging examples where national statistical offices and other official statistics producers are using citizen science. And then finally, we use this term as the umbrella term for many other terms that you may have heard out there that I have on my screen. What is also very important to highlight, one of the colleagues who contributed to this policy brief, Dilek Freisel, she led an effort in 2020 to map all the SDG indicators, and they've identified that citizen science data has the potential to contribute to monitoring 76 global SDG indicators. This policy brief had been informed also to a large extent to the Crowd4SDG citizen science data survey that we conducted last year with the participation of 144 respondents. The survey was administered through national statistical offices to broader national statistical systems. And as you can see, around 10% of respondents worked with citizen science data. Some of the key findings show that those who have worked with citizen science data identify limited access to data, legal issues, then incoherent use or lack of use of statistical concepts, selection bias as some of the key challenges, plus the lack of information about how exactly those data were produced. But if you look at the respondents in general, it turns out that other challenges are actually lack of awareness. Many are not aware of the potential of citizen science data. And this policy brief is also about filling this gap. Or they lack methodological guidance, they need some help, or they lack human capacity, so there is also perception that they may lack technology or some financial support. Now, one of the sort of key things we've realized as part of doing this research is that there are two ways to approach citizen science data projects. We've seen quite a few examples of what we call passive approach or citizen science data light, where basically the idea is the following, that citizen science data may already be available, that the data that NSOs need, and it's a matter of sort of finding out and then seeing whether we can use it. So for example, Philippine Statistical Authority, they've conducted a comprehensive mapping of all citizen science, citizen generated data in the country that might be relevant for SDGs or National Development Plan. And then other organizations in other countries, for example, you will see an example today from UK UNECE. They've developed, for example, a quality assurance approach so that to see to what extent this data can be published, for example, as non-official data. However, in some cases, such data may not exist. So here an active approach or co-creation might be really useful. And national statistical offices then sort of can really provide data stewardship from the beginning of the data process to help ensure that the produced data can meet the key quality criteria. This can also help build more broader collaboration of national statistical offices with civil society organizations and academia, and create some other positive spillovers. It's important to say that just doing the mapping is not enough. What is really important is also to promote this culture of collaboration and to ensure that there is an enabling data governance environment that enables effective data partnerships, and that this matching happens naturally. Then we also present a set of quality criteria. You can see them here. Some of them are sort of the standard ones based on the UN National Quality Assurance Framework that are on the top. And also we propose some additional quality criteria, for example, related to documenting data journey, impartiality, confidentiality, privacy, and then self-identification. That is also an important principle in a human rights-based approach to data. And this is based also on fundamental principles of official statistics. And then we came up with a set of recommendations. So this is sort of the final part of my presentation. What we thought would be good for national statistical offices to do, those who would like to engage more actively with citizen science data, would be to start with a mapping exercise of civil society organizations and academia, those who may already produce data or those who may have potential to produce relevant data. Then update, if necessary, the legal basis. Then also to strengthen the mandate of NSOs to engage with civil society organizations, academia, etc. Then strengthen partnerships with civil society organizations, academia, and communities more broadly. Here, perhaps, for example, data user engagement activities may be an interesting entry point, where sometimes you may find out that some of your data users may also be producing some data or could help you with that. Then it's important to clearly define for what citizen science data will be used. Then we also recommend that national statistical offices define their quality standards and criteria. For example, similar to what I've shown or what our colleagues from UK will be showing now. Adopting a quality assurance mechanism to then basically implement these criteria. Here, for example, a scoring matrix could be used, and you will also see some examples. Promoting more broadly a culture of innovation and collaboration with new data actors. Leadership is essential here. And finally, building capacities and delivering training to stakeholders. In particular, also for citizen scientists in terms of statistical literacy, principles of official statistics, and then the awareness of NSOs about the potential of citizen science data. Here, I just have an example of a scoring matrix, but the UK colleagues will present this in more detail. This is the one that we used for some data set assessments. And also here, I just listed the colleagues who have contributed to this policy brief. And I will finish my presentation at this point. Thank you very much. And I hand it over to you, Howie.
Thank you so much, Elena, for sticking to your time. Also, great presentation. Congratulations on the policy brief. Let me move on to the next presentation. And we have two speakers from UK UNECE. One is from Alanaska and Emma. They're both senior statistical analysts from UNECE. They will be talking about case studies in UK, and it's very exciting. Very interesting quality assurance framework as well. Floor is yours.
Thank you. I'll just wait for my slides to appear. There we go. Thanks. So yes, I'm at Alaska, working at the Office for National Statistics UK, specifically within the UK SDG data team. So me and my colleague Emma are responsible for sourcing data for the UK's progress towards the SDGs, and then uploading that on our national reporting platform. So I'll tell you a bit about this quality assurance tool that we have developed specifically for the assessment of non-official statistical sources and their suitability for SDG reporting. Next slide, please. So yeah, first of all, I want to quickly touch on what we define as non-official statistical sources. So for our purposes, it's basically any data or statistical outputs that don't come from a UK governmental department or related government body, or don't come from an official international reporting body such as Eurostat, a UN custodian agency, or the OECD. And the reason is because all of these institutions have some sort of formal code of practice for statistics. So we can trust in the quality of their data. So in the UK, we have the Code of Practice for Official Statistics, which is designed and regulated by the UK Statistics Authority and the Office for Statistics Regulation. And then there is, of course, the Fundamental Principles of Official Statistics. And there is, the European equivalent as well. So basically, this tool, quality assessment tool, was developed for data from charities, businesses, academia, and citizen science, of course, so that we can assess the quality of those sources. Next slide, please. So yeah, the tool, or as we became to call it, the non-official protocol, you can see a diagram of it on the left. It's basically like a decision tree, which gives you a score at the end that helps you decide whether the specific source being assessed is suitable for reporting. I'll go just over the briefly over the details today, but we do have a publication that goes in a bit more in depth into all of this, and that's linked on the right hand side there. So our tool is based on a model originally developed from Statistics Netherlands, but we've adapted it to our national context. So it's quite heavily based on the our code of practice for statistics as well, which has 3 pillars: trustworthiness, quality, and value. And we've selected the most relevant parts from that we can apply for the assessment of non-official sources. So the first stage is a quality gateway. So that's a pass or fail stage, which has 3 criteria. So that's ethics and privacy, transparency and accountability, and need. So to proceed to the next stage, the source needs to pass all of these. And then we proceed to the quality matrix, which has a similar structure, but instead of pass or fail, you have you assign a score from 0, which is not acceptable, to 3, which is ideal. And you have criteria of timeliness and availability, relevance, coverage, methods, and data quality. After this assessment has been done, if the average score is over 1.5 and there are no scores of 0, then it's considered suitable to use on the platform. Otherwise, it's a fail. But even if it's a fail, then the good thing about the model is that you can go back and see why it failed, which criteria was it, or combination of criteria. And then this can open conversation with the data supplier, and perhaps it can be ameliorated and scored again. But it's important to know that we have a policy that anything we report on our platform for the SDGs must be publicly available. So essentially, all of the information that you need in order to score the source and tick all these boxes, it has to be in the public domain. So that's quite important. So essentially, it's done for the final statistical output rather than the raw data. But if you deal with raw data, which we do in some cases from non-official providers, we would eventually publish a statistical output with some metadata surrounding it. And it's this final output that we would score. Next slide, please. So this was just a diagram about it, but I'll show you how it translates into the actual tool, which is a spreadsheet essentially. And as a case study, we'll use the Marine Conservation Society data, which my colleague will speak a bit more about later. But this is basically citizen science data, which we're going to use to fill in a gap for indicator 1411 part B. So it's basically beach litter data, which is taken from organized beach cleans by trained volunteers across the country. They survey a minimum of 100-meter beach stretch, and they record all the items that they find. And this information is then uploaded to a national database, which dates back to 1994. And it's essentially this raw data that we got from the Marine Conservation Society, and the UNECE is working on a publication based on this data that we will then use to fill in indicator 1411, or part of it anyway. Next slide, please. Yeah, so again, this is basically the diagram, how it translates into the actual tool. This is the pass or fail gateway. So we have the 3 criteria on the side, and in the gray fields, they're static. So they just tell you what it takes for the source to pass and what it takes for it to fail. And then the person scoring it needs to make the decision, is it a pass or is it a fail, and give a short justification as to why they made this decision, which is then double checked by another member of staff. So in this case, all of the 3 passed. And you can see, we won't go into detail, but there is reference to code principle T1 or T4.1 and so on. So these are references to the code of practice, and T stands for the trustworthiness pillar. So essentially you need to have this tool and the code of practice next to it so that you can do the assessment together. Next slide, please. So because it passed all 3, then you can proceed to the scoring matrix, which has, the scores from 3 to 0. Same principle again. This is the timeliness and ongoing availability dimension and explanation. What it needs for a score of 3 and so on. So in this case, it's scored at 3. So you go to the next criteria. Next slide, please. Which is relevancy coverage. Again, the same principle. In this case, it's scored at 2 for coverage, because for a high score of 3, we can see that it requires a full UK geography coverage, and the data had a small sample for Northern Ireland. So there may be some bias there, which is why the score went a bit low, but it's still an acceptable score of 2. Next slide, please. And finally, we have the methods and data quality. Again, you input your score and some explanation as to why you decided this. And finally, the tool gives you an overall score of 2.6 in this case, which is over 1.5. And because there were also no zeros and the gateway was a pass, the overall score is a pass as well. So we can use it on the platform. It's not there just yet, but it will be very soon because it has been scored. Next slide, please. So this was an example with the beach litter data, but here I'm just listing very quickly some indicators where we already have filled in either fully or partially with non-official statistical sources. And these are just some examples, and they have all been scored using this tool. Next slide, please. And yeah, that's it all from me in a nutshell. You have links to our reporting platform there, and also the publication, which I mentioned, that gives you a lot more detail on the scoring criteria and all of that part. And next, Emma will tell you about the beach litter data in a bit more detail. I think we can move to the next slide.
Thanks, Natanaska. Yeah, so I'm just going to go into a bit more detail about what we did with the beach litter data once we received it from the Marine Conservation Society, and how we're going to use it for 1411B. Next slide, please. So the Marine Conservation Society are a UK charity. They run a large citizen science event every year. They've been doing it since 1994, and it's called the Great British Beach Clean. So essentially groups of volunteers use methodology from the MCS, and they fill in standard data collection forms, and they basically pick up litter and count the items and classify them. So next slide, please. So we met with MCS about a year ago to discuss their methods and to see if they were willing to share their data with us, which they were. So once we'd ingested the data, we then spent quite a while assessing that and deciding exactly how we were going to produce the estimates, and whether we needed to do any kind of adjustments of the data. So we then wrote up the methods, and this is going to be published by the Natural Capital Account team by the ONS next month. Next slide, please. Oh, the background of that has changed. So it used to be a picture of a beach, but we've got space instead. Anyway, so citizen science data has the major benefit of large sample sizes, and the Great British Beach Clean is it's no exception to that. So last year, 456 beaches were included in the sample, which is way more than we'd get with any other data set for beach cleans. However, citizen science data often, I think, has a limitation in that certain variables may be less tightly controlled than they would be in other types of data set. So, for example, Marine Conservation Society, one of their aims is to collect the data, but it's not their only goal. So they also want to have public participation and increase awareness in the community, so that they're not going to be turning away volunteers simply so that they can have the same number of volunteers collecting data on each beach. Next slide, please. So when we got the data, our kind of key question that we were asking was, what is driving the trends in the litter density estimate? So could we say that this is likely to be reflective in an actual change in litter density, or could it potentially be influenced by other variables such as the length of the beach surveyed, the number of volunteers, and the composition of beaches, etc. So I'm just going to talk about length of beach surveyed here. Next, please. So this chart just shows you that the length surveyed does actually impact litter density estimates. So the y-axis shows the plastic litter count per metre. So it already controls for the length of beach surveyed. So this is the length that volunteers collected litter over, not the length of the actual beach. And you can see there's a huge range in lengths going from about 10 metres all the way up to several kilometres. So this chart is about 50 kilometres. So if there was no impact of length surveyed on litter density estimate, then we'd expect the blue line, which is just a best fit line from a general additive model, we'd expect that line to be flat. However, you can see I've pointed out 100 metres there, and this is the length that the MCS recommend volunteers to stick to. So below 100 metres, we get much higher litter density estimates than above 100 metres. So if we go to the next slide, we'll see this is actually an issue with this particular data set because there is also a temporal trend in the length of beach surveyed. So it's now pretty standardized at 100 metres, so nearly all surveys are carried out over 100 metres. However, back in 1994, the median was around about 750 metres. So even if the actual amount of litter on British beaches hadn't changed in that whole period, we would expect to see an increase in the litter density estimate over time, because longer stretches result in lower density estimates. So if we go on to the next slide, you see this is actually what we did find. So if we just focus on the blue line to start with, each of these plots is for a different constituent country of the UK, with the UK at the end. So the blue line is all the data, and this is the trend that we would have published had we not investigated the impact of length surveyed. So if we look at Wales, for example, the fourth plot there, the story we might have taken from that chart is that in around about 2011 to 2013, there was a huge jump in litter density on Welsh beaches, which may of course concern, and we might have started asking questions about why that would be. However, if we then remove any surveys that were not 100 metres, we get the red line, and this shows a very different story. So from the red line, we can say that there has been a general and pretty steady decline in litter density on Welsh beaches since 2004. So you see where the lines start to match up, that's just where the 100 metres became much more standard. So next slide, please. So we've made a few adjustments. We've limited the data set to only 100 metre surveys. This had an impact on the sample size, particularly in earlier years. So we're also only going to report this series from 2008 onwards. We only include one survey per beach per year, and we use the median. So this is because the data is very skewed and has a lot of outliers just because of the nature of beach litter data. We've also made sure to include a fair number of quality notes. So we know that volunteer numbers has an impact on litter density. And we also know that in 2020, the number of volunteers in any one survey was significantly lower because of COVID restrictions. So we're not including that in our time series, and in the Natural Capital publication, there'll be a quality note on it. For a similar reason, that volunteer counts vary between the countries, we are recommending that density of litter is not compared between the constituent countries of the UK. And we also note that we can't control for lengths of time since the beach was last cleaned. So we can say that litter density has declined over time. However, we can't say that people are dropping less litter on the beaches, because it may just be that also the frequency of beach cleaning has increased over that period. So that is the end. I'm not sure if we're taking questions or not, but I hope you found that interesting.
Thank you so much for the excellent chart. Oh, right on time. Sorry, I have a timer here. So I just got a message. Thank you both from Gillian. So we would move Gillian's presentation towards the end of part 1. And next, let's move to Hester Walton. She works at National Institute for Public Health and the Environment in the Netherlands. She's an air quality scientist. The floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. I will start showing my presentation. If everything's okay, I hope you can all see it now. I'm working at the National Institute of Public Health and the Environment, and I would like to tell you something about how combining citizen science data and official data can be a win-win situation for institutes like ours, but also for the citizens. Since air pollution is the single largest environmental health risk that we face, our institute is very interested in official air quality data. This is one of our core tasks to monitor air quality, and to do that we have measurement cabins all over the country, about 50 nationwide, and then some extra from local environmental protection agencies around the harbors of Rotterdam and Amsterdam. And we have these measurement cabins. They are jammed full of expensive equipment to measure air quality. And some 10 years ago, we started to notice that we were not the only ones measuring air quality, but we saw that citizen scientists were also more and more measuring air quality using inexpensive sensors. And of course, this was very good news, because the more interest for this problem of air quality, the better it is, the more publicity, the more awareness you're raising. And if you want to do something about it, this is just very useful. But it was also for us as a national institute doing the official measurement, it was also pretty scary. Because what is our role in this situation? What are these measurements worth? How well are these measurements done? Don't people trust us anymore? So this was the kind of questions we were having, and since we realized that citizen science was not going to go away just because we were scared of it, we decided that the best way forward was to embrace citizen science measurements and to talk to the citizen scientists. And this resulted in the end in a citizen science support infrastructure, if you wish. And this is based on what we asked the citizens, what they needed from us. And what they need from us is something that is very close to the role we have already, namely giving expert information. We are the experts who do the official measurements. We can tell people what air quality is, but we can also provide them information on how to do the measurements, what the sensors are worth, but also what the citizens would like to have is a meeting place, or a place where they could meet each other, form a community, and where also they could share the data. And the most important question they asked us is, can you tell us a little bit more about how good my data is? Because citizen scientists are very keen on producing the best possible data. So we built this citizen science infrastructure, and it's called Measure Together, and it provides information in a knowledge portal, and it's also providing a place to share the data in a data portal. And this data portal has been growing very fast. We have started in 2016 with 70 sensors on the map, and these were particulate matter sensors, and they were very bad quality. But 4 years later, in 2020, we were already at 1,000 particulate matter sensors in the Netherlands, and now at this moment, 2 years later, it's over 2,000. And not only the number of citizen science measurements has been growing very fast, but also the data quality has been increasing. So taking citizen science seriously for us has been a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because we support it, the community has been able to grow much faster, and also the quality of the data has been increasing. And this is something you can see here. This is one of an example of a local community popping up. And this is in the rural areas in the Netherlands. You saw, if you looked at the database, that in the beginning, the measurements were largely in cities. But people in rural areas are also very concerned about the air quality in the Netherlands, since agriculture is contributing quite a lot to the pollution. And this is in a rural area, and you see the data of these particulate matter sensors is quite consistent. They all show similar behavior. Of course, you see some local peaks, but maybe they are next to a wood stove or an exhaust pipe. So this is really quite nice data. The data, by the way, is from by using the sensor community approach. And I will explain a little bit more about sensor community approach. This is something we recommend for citizen science bottom-up projects like these ones. And these 80 sensors that you see in this rural community, they were popping up within 3 months. So this is at a space that is really, for us as a governmental institute, unattainable, but citizen science can do it. Well, if you have this much data, you can also do statistics on it and a data quality assessment. And this is one of the things that we do that adds value to this citizen science data. So here on the left, you see, for example, a picture of all the data on one particular moment. These are hourly values, and we give a plausibility level to this data, which is based on the sensor data in the neighborhood. So if your sensor is behaving really different from other sensors in the neighborhood, or from the official data in the neighborhood, then you get a low plausibility. And if you filter out this low plausibility data, then you go to the picture to the right, and you see that the data behavior, is really very nice. And the colors you see behind the data points, that is actually the model calculations that we base also on the sensor data. Now, if you look into more detail at this modeling, here you see on the left, you see the concentration map as we modeled them before, based on the official data points. And if we include also the sensor data, you can just see that the detail that you can model is much higher. So even though these sensor data are not as good as the official data, you get a much more detailed map. And this is, of course, incredibly useful for policymakers. And on the right, you see also something that I could say is an event. This is New Year's Eve in the Netherlands, and that people start using fireworks. And you saw at 12 o'clock the fireworks there, the whole country turned purple because of the fireworks. And then in the course of the night, the plume of particulate matter was blown with the prevailing southwestern wind to the north of the country. Now this is, you can see this in so much detail. This is also used, for example, during calamities by firefighters, to see where the plume of the pollution is going. So by doing these measurements in this new way, you also make it possible to use the data in different ways. Now, you may think that this is typically for the Netherlands, and this is something cultural. The people in the Netherlands are more interested in air quality, but then you would be wrong, because citizen science is being done all over Europe. And one of the organizations I already mentioned that we also work with, because they're quite big in the Netherlands, also because we promote it, is Sensor Community. Sensor Community is actually giving you a design for a particulate matter sensor, which costs only about 50 euros. And the way to build it is described in 24 languages. It's available in 70 countries, and there's more than 14,000 active sensors right now. And so if you want to start doing air quality citizen science in your country, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Just go talk to, I think Lucas is also in this meeting. So just go talk to Sensor Community, but just to get a kickstart. It's more than half of the sensors in the Netherlands are actually also Sensor Community sensors. So you can, of course, can go beyond air quality. Sensor Community, since we talked to them a lot, we found out that they were also doing noise measurements, and we also found that people are really interested in doing noise measurements. So we also support that, because once you build the infrastructure for air quality, it's very easy to add extra layers on the map and just do the same thing for example, noise. So here in the middle, you see the picture of all the noise meters that are currently built by citizen scientists in the Netherlands and that we are currently testing. And again, a lot of them are from Sensor Community on our map, but there are more. And we are measuring noise around airports and trains. Of course, as I said, you don't have to stop there. You can also add water quality on the map, or temperature, or other air quality parameters, whatever the citizens would like to measure in terms of environmental parameters or climate parameters, you could add and you could start to use. So this is where I would like to wrap up this presentation. Please go for the win-win, because combining citizen science data and official data, that is really something that that can be done in all countries in Europe. And to show you that we are not the only ones, I also included here this picture of a beautiful data portal in Flanders, Belgium. These are also Sensor Community data points combined with official data points in Belgium. And so this is really something that can be done in all the countries, and I hope it one day can be done all over the world. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Hester, for sharing the study, the work, and also a lot of great experiences, the bottom-up approach and communicating the data quality. So I would like to now invite our next speaker, Barbara Panichi. She's from University Polytechnic, sorry, I don't know how to, professor in computer science. Please pardon my pronunciation.
Politecnico di Milano.
Politecnico di Milano. I'm doing better in Milano. So Barbara will be talking about the study on timeliness of disaster-related data. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sharing my slides. So I'm going to present now a study we did recently on where we were trying to study how you can get information from social media. So it is done use information that citizens were posting voluntarily, but not for this purpose. So it's related to what Elena was saying. And we do that in the context of the project Crowd4SDG that was mentioned before, and in particular in the context of the SDG 13 climate action. What was noticed was that having some information which is timely is important in order to improve the indicator, the first indicator for SDG 13 about getting information about the impacted people from climate action events. And we want to focus on supporting emergency response, giving timely data. We focus on Twitter as a social media source, and we have a number of issues that have been studied since a few years about using this type of source of data, which are mainly relevant to the fact that events happen anywhere in the world. So the problem, one of the problems is to gather information with many languages. So not only English as a base language, and not only the most used languages in the world. We wanted to focus on the onset of flood events and to compare our work. We wanted to analyze the timeliness of the delivery of this information with respect to the usual sources that are used for this purpose. And also we were focusing on representing the spatial aspects of this information, so where the event is occurring. We noticed also that different floods events have different characteristics. So it is sometimes difficult to have already pre-prepared social media automatic collection of information, because we have to focus on the specificity of the event. In particular, the language is one of the factors which are critical. So I will present here the results of the recent work. So we were focusing on handling language-specific events, because as we will see that sometimes you can see on the social media an event only if you're considering the local languages. But the problem with that is that typically we don't have a collection of search keywords to identify the event in advance. So we want to start with a very small word dictionary, so a couple of words just to start with. And then we focus on tweets which have images, so they are probably describing the event, and we filter the images so that they are really photographs, and they are not selfies and the like. So we first select tweets that are potentially interesting, and then we can do a text analysis of these tweets to be able to find new words which are interesting to describe the event, and also consider in the analysis of the occurrence of the event if also text-only quick tweets, which are the most difficult to handle if you don't have a direct tools to analyze specific languages. So we can do that without knowing the language, but just looking at the contents of the previous tweets. And then we geolocate them using a geolocation mechanism to identify locations, and we draw intensity maps. So we were doing 2 case studies, and we were following this process. So first of all, we see whether there is something which is occurring looking at time series analysis, or if there are peaks in talking about a specific situation in a given moment. And then we start the analysis as I was showing with the filtering, the geolocalization, and then we as a result, we are trying to identify which is the day in which we have the event occurrence, which is clear. So we wanted to compare it with official data, doing a case study on events that have been occurring last year. We were studying two case studies in particular. One was in Thailand in September, and we were studying also floods in Nepal. Both they were posing language issues, and we were studying that aspect. So first of all, here, this is for Thailand, we see that if we just use English, it's difficult to detect an event. While even if we use a very small set of words, in this case too, we are detecting it quite well. We see that there is a clear increase on the number of tweets over the time of the event. This event was starting on the 26th of September. So this is one first thing that we can observe, but what is important is that we are able also to combine this first result with some evidence about the location. So as I was saying, we find tweets with images, we filter them, so some of them are more relevant. Of course, there are many noisy images in tweets, so people are talking about different things. Some are relevant, some less. You see here just some examples. And in this way, in the end, we can also use some more keywords to analyze text-only tweets. So here you see that there is a comparison just with 3 keywords, and we see that 2 represented the flood are the ones which are already useful, and we can find other tweets talking about the events starting from this basis in order to identify more tweets and to get more evidence in the country. As a result, we were able to compare our results with some official maps which were produced during the event. So this is referring to the 28th of September, and we see that the most affected area are visible from Twitter. We see also other steps that we can consider. So you can only consider some native Twitter geolocation, so only the posts which have a geolocation. You see that map is fairly incomplete. The same if we are considering just the geolocation of tweets, and if we add extended tweet set with textual tweets, we are getting closer to a realistic representation of the situation. What was important for us was that we wanted to compare to other sources of information in this case, and we are working towards merging different sources. First of all, some forecasts. So there was a forecast which was forecasting this event on the 24th of September. And we were able to say that the event was happening starting the 26th. It was actually reported by official sources on the 27th, so one day later. So this means that we could think of anticipating the actual alerts which are given officially hours or one day or even more. In the Nepali case study, this was a couple of days more than the official list. So this is a promising direction for having some information. The time for processing tweets is just a fraction of seconds, and so this is also not really a performance issue, even if we had some millions of tweets to analyze in the beginning, especially in the Thai case studies. And the next steps we are working on are about validating this data with through more quality checked with respect to ground truth, using crowdsourcing to evaluate the uncertainty both in space and in time of our results, so to improve the quality of our results in terms of data set given to interested people. And we are working towards trying to match different sources, so using a multimodal approach for an automatic event triggering. So we are going to present this work also at ISCRAM. So if somebody is interested in this work, we can also share the paper. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Barbara. Really grateful for your great presentation. And then we've seen a lot of countries trying to use social media data and add it with benchmarking. I think this is great lesson learned experiences that we would definitely love to share your experience with others. Also grateful for the great speakers so far. It's for keeping on time within your time limit. This is really good. We have 6 presenters, and next I would like to move to our colleagues from University of Geneva, Francois Gray. He'll be presenting on the Crowd4SDG and the tier cycle competition. And I also invite all attendees or participants, if you have any questions, please also feel free to type in under the chat. Francois, the floor is yours. You have 10 minutes. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I'll just share my slides here. And here we go. So I'll be talking about really complementary to what my colleague Barbara Panichi was talking about, which was some of the research results coming out of the Crowd4SDG project. The project is a European research and innovation project, and it has a component that's all about how to innovate around citizen science and crowdsourcing for the SDGs, in particular around issues related to climate action. So I'm sitting here in something called the SDG solution space, which is a shared space our university runs right in the middle of international Geneva, just across the street from our colleagues at UNITAR and down the road from the Palais des Nations where UNECE is. And we use this space to get young people to work on hands-on solutions for problems with the SDGs, often involving crowdsourcing. We're very much inspired by Jean Piaget, who was a famous psychologist and professor at our university for 50 years, who also set up the International Bureau of Education, the predecessor of UNESCO. And this famous phrase he has, the principal goal of education should be creating men and women who are capable of doing new things, not simply repeating what other generations have done. So in that spirit, our challenge-based innovation is all about introducing crowdsourcing to young people as a way to gather data about issues that matter to them, especially related to climate action. And we anticipated, I think, a lot of what's being discussed here today several years ago. This is an article in Nature by our rector and the director of UNITAR, where we were arguing that crowdsourcing, to achieve its full potential, would really need governments to act and get public participation into the SDGs. And it's really nice to see some of these great examples from the UK, from the Netherlands, showing how that's really happening now. And I really like this emphasis on combining national statistics results with citizen science. So in Crowd4SDG, we're very much focused on getting in touch with young people. Young people want change, especially around climate issues. They can go out and protest for that change, but we hear, many of them would like to do more, would like to see concrete impact of their efforts. And so the innovation cycle that we have is really addressing that and addressing the overall mission of the Crowd4SDG project, which is to look at what are the standards by which citizen science can contribute to both tracking progress towards the SDGs, measuring, for example, data relevant to indicators, but also generating the sort of grassroots innovation that actually will be able to make a change on our issues related to sustainability and hopefully impact climate change in a positive way. So the methodology we use is very simple. It's basically a funnel. We take in over an 8-week period, about 250 people will pitch ideas, and we'll put them into teams, and those teams will then work over 5 weeks online. This is all on Zoom, something we call the Open 17 Challenge. They'll work online together in teams that are formed from people all around the world, young people, on projects that they want to develop. And we coach them on how to turn an initial project idea gradually into a working prototype. The very best projects from this first evaluate phase go to what we call an accelerate phase. This is run by our colleagues at CERN here in Geneva at the CERN Idea Square, and what they do there is prototyping with support from the team at CERN and our colleagues from the other partners of Crowd4SDG. That was originally a 2-week intensive in-person event. At least we had planned it that way, but then COVID came in the way, so we have moved that all online, and it runs now over a couple of months, but it produces very good results as well. And finally, the idea is that the very best projects, or at least the projects I would say that we think we can help move forward most easily, are brought to Geneva as part of an event called the Geneva Trial, which just happened here a few weeks ago at Campus Biotech here in Geneva. So over a 1-day event plus a hackathon that might go on for another day, we're able to help these participants who have good projects. So the whole thing works by gathering good ideas on a platform, and it's a platform that's actually a social network for good. It's set up here it's a company. It's been around for 10 years. It's called Goodwall. Actually, it's two young students from our university who spun it out. And Goodwall is often identifies themselves as LinkedIn for Generation Z. We call them TikTok for the SDGs, because people can post short videos with their ideas on this platform. We select the best ones that way. So this is from our first gear cycle in 2020, which was all about climate and cities, and in particular, urban water resilience. And out of that came several very interesting projects. Here I'm just showing you that by doing this all online, on Zoom, and on a platform like Goodwall, we immediately have not just European, but really a global coverage, and students from many continents and regions working together, students, young people, sometimes not so young people, able to participate that way. Here is one example of one project that we've been helping that came out of this first gear cycle. The person you see on the right, Dia Viradia, was, when she started, 15 years old. She's now, I think, approaching 17. She's still a high school student, and she had this great idea in her city, San Jose. There have been some major floods. She knew that at road crossings in San Jose, there are cameras, CCTV cameras, to catch people going through red lights, but they also catch good views of the floods. And that data could be automatically harvested, pretty much using the same techniques that Barbara was talking about, both using AI and then crowdsourced to really refine the data and potentially provide first responders or people trying after the flood to improve the situation in the city to do their job. So Dia, out of this, she and her team, she's the first author now on a poster that was presented at a major conference on disaster management, ICRAM. But her project also won a competition to join a social incubator in her city run by a group called Code for America. And she's won a couple of other prizes since then for this project. So this is exactly the sort of innovation cycle we'd like to see, is helping these young people learn about crowdsourcing tools that can let them engage with sustainability issues relevant to their communities, to their region, and let them also figure out how to take those projects further by themselves with support from institutions around them. So our most recent gear cycle, which started last August and finished with the Geneva Trial a few weeks ago, was all about climate and gender. And I'm just going to show two highlights. These were the projects that came out of this. Hold on a second, excuse me. Right. One of them is called Donate Water. This project came from a team in Nigeria. The issue was access to clean water, especially how it affects women when they don't have access, how it negatively affects their lives. They had ideas about really building solar-powered water pumps. And one of the things we do as we work with them and coach them through the project is to figure out how they can gather data that will actually justify, perhaps allow them to raise funding for what they want to do. And the data that they're gathering is about broken water pumps, really showing where there are problems with access to water in a certain region. And thanks to our colleagues at UNITAR and also other colleagues involved in the Crowd4SDG project, we've been able to bring this team into contact with an incubator called AfriLabs that's active in Nigeria, as well as with the National Statistical Office of Nigeria that has given some very helpful feedback on this project and how to implement it in practice. Another project is from it's a team of a Colombian and Nigerian team led here by Melin Hurtado, and she was very interested in the issue of the knowledge that indigenous women have about climate change, about the climate, about their environment, about biodiversity around them, and gathering as much of that as possible. And we're working with her to focus in on the issue of biodiversity, which is something that often indigenous women are able to capture in regions where there's very sparse amounts of information otherwise. And her project is now going to move into an SDG accelerator phase. She's doing an internship here in Geneva with this SDG accelerator that a colleague of mine who's online here, Jose Luis, runs. She's also in touch with OHCHR, and we'll hear from them just after the Q&A on ideas they have for how citizen science and human rights can fit together. And UNITAR is getting us in touch with the Colombian NSO. So last slide is just showing you that was the first two cycles of a 3-cycle project. So the third cycle of innovation will focus yet again on climate action, but also on SDG 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions. And so we're very keen to hear from you today about ideas you might have for where citizen science could be useful at the nexus of those two SDGs. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Francois. It's a really great exercise to really engage from really the beginning, and also volunteers to help. So I'll reach out and see how we can get your support to help with some of our projects, maybe. Now, let me see whether Jillian, are you ready for your presentation?
Yes, absolutely.
That's great. So we have Jillian, and she is, sorry, I'm looking here, title, Head of Monitoring, Review, and Reporting at UNCBD. Jillian, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So I had decided that I wasn't really going to give a presentation, and I was sort of going to take a step back from all the very practical examples that everyone has presented today. So I think the presentations have been extremely interesting in terms of demonstrating how citizen science can really add value to specific SDGs across the SDG framework. And it was mentioned at the beginning that Dilek Frazel had led a study to try to show which SDGs citizen science could be potentially relevant for. And many of those are in SDG 14 and SDG 15. And these are the oceans and land, so the sort of biodiversity related SDGs. I mean, biodiversity cuts across as well, but these are the ones with the high focus. And as in the Convention on Biological Diversity, what is happening right now is we're leading up to the development of a post-2020 global biodiversity framework, which will be sort of like a Paris Climate Agreement for nature, or this is the ambition of the Convention on Biological Diversity's new strategic plan. And as part of that, it will be accompanied with a monitoring framework. And so one of the things that we've been looking at with the countries that are members of the convention is what indicators are already being measured in terms of the health of the planet and nature in the SDGs, and where are the gaps and how do we fill those gaps? And so if you look at SDG 14 and 15, many of the indicators that are in there currently are more policy related indicators that relate to the existence of a marine spatial plan, or indicators that relate to, management of forest or protecting areas. And all these things are very important. But actually in the SDGs, there's an absence of data on outcomes. And I think all of the presentations today actually were more on the outcomes. And this is where citizen science and citizen generated data is going to be essential, because in order to measure the outcomes, in order to measure water quality or species counts or ecosystem health type information or ecosystem service provisioning, this is all local level information that you need, and you need it often from places that are remote. So the places that you have the highest concentration of biodiversity are places where people don't live. And so it makes it incredibly difficult for national statistical offices or governments alone to develop a way to monitor biodiversity, because it's just cost prohibitive to be sending people out into the ocean or sending people out into very isolated areas in order to take detailed measurements. And so I think it's an example of identifying a need and then trying to figure out how citizen science can feed that need. So how can people be motivated in order to contribute data to these different areas that would then allow better monitoring in the future? And so I wanted to sort of highlight that one of the ways that the Red List, which is one of the SDGs on extinctions or related to extinctions, or another one is the Living Planet Index, which really looks into examples of how you look at population dynamics. These are often have the GBIF, which is a citizen science-based data system at the bottom of them. And so GBIF is a global biodiversity information facility, which brings together citizen science type data on species occurrence from many, many different initiatives, and tries to bring these together. And when you look at what is in the GBIF database, there's a very high concentration of species occurrence data coming from Europe, from North America. Actually, I think it's 70% of the records come from these two places. And this is, of course, not where the majority of biodiversity is located. And so we need to find some way that we can sort of turn the dynamics around and figure out how do we actually get people to collect data where it's most needed. And then and additionally, citizens often collect data on things that interest them. And so how do we get people involved in more topics? I think the marine litter one is an interesting example, because there was not such an interest in marine litter. And now there is such an interest that it's a lot easier to get people out and collecting this data due to the fact that, all these photos of turtles and photos of polluted beaches started making their way into the media. And so then you had more engaged citizens. So if you look at biodiversity or goals 14 and 15, what you see is there's a lot of people interested in birds. Bird watching has a huge history, and there are people who use apps for bird watching. And so the data on bird species occurrence is actually quite good compared to other species. So people are motivated in order to contribute information based on bird populations. And so again, it's how do we get people in the right places? How do we form collaborations with groups and get citizens interested in collecting the kind of information that's actually needed in order for us at the global sort of UN level or at the government level? How do we get people to collect information that can really benefit us in a way that is good for everyone and also feeds information back to people. And so I think that for me, we have sort of double challenges here based on the presentations that we've heard. The one is trying to demonstrate to the national statistical systems the value of citizen science. And the other is from the national statistical system side, trying to go back to the citizen science community and say, okay, how do we also get you engaged in collecting the kind of data that we really need to fill some of these key data gaps? And so, I think that there's still quite a ways to go in terms of how we form these collaborations and build a community that allows us to track the issues that are most important to the people and to development and to the planet. And so I think that for me, in thinking about what citizen science can do for goal 14 and 15, this is really the challenge, is filling some of these data gaps in terms of how do we actually get people to track mushrooms or provide information on the condition of ecosystems in places that are more remote, or how do we get people involved in determining which ecosystems are at risk so that interventions can be developed. And so I think that there's still quite a lot of work to be done on this. And I kind of just wanted to leave it at that. And I also wanted to mention, as I said, with the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, this is very much the focus of the monitoring framework that's being developed, is how do we actually determine what information we most need in order to avoid ecosystem collapse and biodiversity loss, and then how do we find people who are able and willing to fill these gaps and get people interested. And so I think I'll just leave it at that in terms of how I see moving forward with monitoring these two aspects of the framework. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jillian. Very interesting question on how to engage. Can I introduce you to the bird watcher groups here in New York City? So, I mean, it's really great intervention, and I think I'm from the household survey community. I think we even face a larger challenge in how to get our respondent to respond to the surveys. And some of the surveys, the response rate is incredibly low. So we have a lot to learn from here. I was just talking to Elena. So we have passed, actually, we're a little behind. Our Q&A session is supposed to end at 2:30 your local time. So right now we're already 4 minutes past. Elena suggests that we could skip the Q&A. We actually will go towards the end. We do the Q&A at the end if we have time. Can we go with the second portion of this meeting? And I would like to invite George. Sorry, it's a surprise. There's no break. And George, who is from OHCHR, he is technology advisor in methodology, education, and training section. He's going to kick off reflections on Goal 16.
Thanks a lot, Howie. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to speak as part of this, and I'm also grateful and echo Gillian's reflections on the presentations that came before me. A really interesting group of presentations touching on many issues, and I'm grateful also for Gillian laying up this this reflection in that the data gaps she spoke about in remote places. What I've found from a human rights perspective is that also I find this spatial and temporal data gaps, both in terms of spatial resolution and temporal resolution. So even where data exists, sometimes it can be 5, 6, 10 years old, and you're sort of looking into the past, a long way into the past, and it can be quite difficult to use that for policy and engage with an issue as it currently exists in the world. And so that really interesting that we talk about data gaps, and I think citizen science and crowdsourcing is a very useful complementary approach, and I think that's come through very strongly in the presentations we heard earlier. Anyway, turning to the the current gear cycle, this intersection of SDGs 13 and 16, so climate action and peace, justice, strong institutions. The SDGs, there are detailed connections between a lot of them. They are so densely connected in the sort of cascading impacts that flow through them. And from a human rights perspective, a safe, clean, healthy, sustainable environment is absolutely integral to the enjoyment of a wide range of human rights. And you can see that within the SDG framework. But if you think about the way climate change, environmental degradation impacts rights such as food, right to water and sanitation, decent shelter, the right to health, the right to personal security, the right to life itself. So as an entry point, it's incredibly important for a great many number of rights, but we have very little data on these linkages. And so added to that, the impacts of climate change are worst for those that are already living in vulnerable situations, including in poverty, as they have less capacity and resources to build their resilience against climate shocks. So this gear cycle is really relevant to a lot of data gaps that my institution experiences on a day-to-day basis, and ones that we'd love to see the global community, citizens across the world coming together to solve. In terms of areas in which I think there's a lot of potential, I think there's two I'd like to highlight. And I think this speaks a little bit to what Francois has already mentioned in terms of some of the projects that the Crowd4SDGs program has already incubated. So the first would be looking at the human rights impacts of environmental harms, particularly on persons in vulnerable situations. And so you heard from Francois reference to climate change and gender, but also there's other grounds recognized in international human rights law that might be relevant. Statisticians will be very familiar with this, sex, age, ethnicity, especially indigenous groups, migration or displacement status, religion, civil status, income, poverty, as well as sexual orientation. So there's a great many lenses through which we can view these cascading impacts of SDG 13 onto SDG 16. So that's the first area, human rights impacts of environmental harms, particularly on persons in vulnerable situations. That's a key sort of data need. Another area, and this is really zooming in on SDG 16, is looking at access to information, participation in decision-making, access to justice, as well as remedy, and the civic space for climate action. And so this would be, for example, looking at access to climate information, access to information on climate preparedness, on mitigation, adaptation, response capabilities, and access to information on climate's finance mechanisms. And then in terms of participation, how can citizens meaningfully participate in environmental and climate matters? How can they participate in decision-making processes? So sort of capturing data on these elements. Another area, access to justice, access to remedy in environmental and climate matters. When we have environmental harms, do citizens have access to a remedy? Are cases brought to justice? Another area to think about would be, threats or attacks against environmental human rights defenders. So talking about the civic space for climate action. There's land rights defenders, environmental rights defenders working across the world. What is the civic space like for them to operate in? Capturing information on these kind of things is another area. And then finally, any negative impacts or climate or environmental action on ecosystems and people. The actions we take in response to this enormous threat to our livelihoods and to our planet. Do those actions themselves have any cascading impacts? So to summarize, returning to those two areas, I think one would be the human rights impacts of environmental harms, particularly on persons in vulnerable situations, and then looking at SDG 16 very closely, looking at institutions, access to information, participation, access to justice and remedy, and the civic space for climate action. That was it from me. Thank you so much for the time. over to you again.
Thank you so much, Georgia. I see a lot of potential for CS, citizen science, and CGD for Goal 16, especially if you look at household surveys, which has been a great source for a lot of SDG indicator, has been actually lacking a lot and for this particular goal. And our group has started working on data integration and using the potential of small household survey probabilistic design to sort of benchmark data from non-traditional sources, including data from CGD. So we have 4 minutes before we end the session. I'm going to ask Elena whether we should open the floor for input from NSOs. I see a hand from Francois, but before I let you speak, Francois, and let me look at the organizer, Elena. How do we best use this 3 minutes towards the end? Yes.
Thank you very much, Howard. Perhaps what we can do, we can invite all participants to send either questions for the presentations or ideas on challenges for Goal 16 and climate action in the chat box so that we could collect them and could follow up afterwards. And then perhaps we could have Francois and maybe someone else from NSO side if someone wants to volunteer 2 persons still to speak, 2 or 3 persons, if it's short.
Yes, great. Francois, floor is yours. And then if countries would like to speak, please let me know.
Yeah, thank you. I think maybe I have a few questions which I can leave just in the air. I don't think they need to be answered, but very much stimulated by what Gillian said and also what George said at the end. One issue we have with getting citizens involved is motivation. And in particular, in the sort of theory of change mentality, just gathering data is usually not enough for them. They want to see change. And I think one of the challenges for the NSOs, I mean, we saw some brilliant results already, is what can you give back to these people in terms of ability to essentially give agency for change? You know, how can you perhaps influence the governments that you know, often the NSOs are part of, to make the changes necessary based on the data that's being gathered? So that would be one question. The second one is also related to that. It's very specific. We're involved in a project with UNICEF looking at whether you could reward people for gathering this kind of data in situations where that would make a big difference to their livelihood. You know, young people in the informal economy in sub-Saharan Africa, to be precise. And my question would be to the NSOs, what is this data actually worth to you? And would you be willing to pay for it? And if so, how much would you be willing to pay for it? I know that might sound challenging, but presumably you need this data. The governments need it. And so the question is simply, is there a value, a monetary value, and could that be translated into rewards, even micro rewards? Finally, the issue that I think related to the many interesting areas that George brought up is however the issue, and we've already run into it on several occasions, that if you gather data for an organization representing the government, and that data might be a little bit embarrassing for the government, you may put people in an awkward situation, in some countries, a risky situation. So we have to think about that when creating new citizen data gathering projects. And so I just leave that as a thought.
Thank you so much, Francois. One last question. Is there National Statistical Office or anyone would like to speak? I see a couple of comments. No. So before I close, I would like to first, of course, thank everyone, all the speakers and the presenters, and thank all the participants. And one small announcement from our side, the UNSC is going to organize an expert group meeting on the use of citizen science, citizen generated data, crowdsourcing, different terminologies. We will be discussing conceptual framework and definitions because there have been so much going on, and the quality assurance part as well. So if you are interested, please reach out in finding out more, please reach out to me. Now, I would like to thank Elena for inviting us to chair the session. I'm going to give the floor back to Elena for if she has, I think she has another announcement to make. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Howie. I guess I will just say that thank you all for participating. Please don't hesitate to send your questions or ideas, maybe data challenges that you are facing in relation to SDG 16, 13, or in general, where you think citizen science data could be useful. You can send it to the email address that Anais has posted in the chat box, a2030@unitar.org. And also, we will be sharing all the documentation related to this event together with the policy brief. And please don't hesitate to contact us. And thank you again for your participation.
Thank you. Oh, I see a hand up, Atanaska.
Oh no, I was just clapping. So yeah, thank you for inviting us. And yeah, it's been a really great session.
Thank you so much. Thank you all. Have a great day and evening.
How will we